Well, this is the last, but definitely not least. Probably it's the, I'm biased, but this is going to be the most interesting panel. And we have three stars in the tech world, but also specifically in the Bitcoin world. And we are very grateful to have you, each of you, be part of this, this great panel. I'd like to give you, well, first extend a welcome to all of you to Korea. It's the first time in Korea for the Winklevoss brothers. Let's give them a warm soul welcome. Yeah, yeah, thank you. And Naval has been in Korea for a few times, but it's the first time in how many years?
In a decade.
In a decade, in 10 years. And we'll ask your opinion in a bit. But I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves. And since this panel is about Bitcoin, how you became involved with Bitcoin and you know, what you general thoughts of how your involvement is going to continue.
Yeah, I'll start. My day job is I run a site called Angelist that matches startups and investors and talent. I really got into Bitcoin pretty late, only about a year and change ago, but it was like a brain virus. Once I understood what Bitcoin was, I couldn't sleep. It was a very powerful concept, and I've just spent a lot of time thinking about it. I've written a few articles on it, organized a few get-togethers, and made just one investment, Corbett, which is a Korean Bitcoin exchange, interestingly enough. And I'm just trying to learn and get educated on the space. So I just consider myself a student in the space as well, just maybe a little further ahead than some people and a little behind others.
Hi, I'm Cameron. I run Winklevoss Capital with my brother Tyler to my right. And basically, we focus on early stage technology companies, generally in the seed stage, pre-A round. And we also are big fans of Bitcoin. We first came across it in the summer of 2012, started studying it, and then started buying it, and then looking at companies in the ecosystem to help support. And about a year ago, in July of 2013, we filed with the SEC for a Bitcoin ETF, and that's one of our current Bitcoin projects that we're working on.
My story is pretty much the same. You know, got fascinated with it, and then, you know, started to learn and kept learning more, and I feel like I'm still learning today. So it's one of those things where it's hard to fully master, and that's what's so exciting about it. And new ideas or new thoughts of where the future is going to go keep emerging, and I think it's just been such an exciting ride the last 2 years, and really excited for, you know, the next future for Bitcoin.
Great. We're going to have another session with Naval tomorrow on specifically asking you questions about Angelist and what Angelist is doing to disrupt the whole angel seed investment field. But today we're going to focus on Bitcoin. There's been a lot of talk, and Naval, you wrote a post about Bitcoin being the internet of money, how money will be disrupted. There's talks, analogies with TCP/IP and email of money. Would you mind giving us a little primer on that analogy?
Yeah, Bitcoin's a very complicated thing. It's not a simple thing. So if this is your first time learning about it, you're going to need to go read a lot. But I think fundamentally, Bitcoin unites a lot of different things. And it is a currency, which people talk about. It's a very efficient electronic currency, like cash, but fully electronic. It is a store of value like gold would be, except you can store it in your head instead of having to store it in a vault. It is a protocol that can be used to exchange value in computer networks. The underlying storage mechanism for Bitcoin, called Hashcash, was originally designed for doing things in computer networks. It is a form of speech. The blockchain that underlies Bitcoin, one of its key technologies, can be used to embed encrypted speech in a way that it cannot be removed. So it is many, many things. And the Internet of Money was just kind of a way of saying that it could be, or at least blockchain technologies, if not Bitcoin itself specifically, could be the most important thing to come along since the internet, and that you're going to see blockchain technologies and proof of work systems and these peer-to-peer networks that Bitcoin is built on being used in many, many, many different contexts and applications. It's not just money, it's a lot more than that. And if you are in the internet business, you need to get educated about Bitcoin because the underlying technologies will recur over and over again in your career.
Thank you. We titled this panel The Tipping Point of Bitcoin, and it was based on the book and ideas put forth by Malcolm Gladwell. And sort of tipping point describes services or products that reach fast epidemic adoption. And so the question to each and all of you is, do you think we are at the tipping point of Bitcoin? Yes? No? Why not? When do you think we'll reach it? Yeah.
Well, I think from a media conscience point, that Bitcoin has tipped in the sense that it's pretty prolific and everyone's heard about it. In terms of the understanding, I don't think we're quite there. And in terms of the use case scenarios in mainstream adoption and use, I don't think we're there yet. I think that majority of G20 countries having clear regulation will set the foundation for Bitcoin to truly have that tipping point mainstream adoption.
Yeah, the current market cap of Bitcoin, I think, is somewhere around $6 billion right now. So it's actually pretty minuscule in the scheme of things. I think the first stage is sort of the speculation, the investing in the actual asset, and that sort of drives the market cap, which creates a bigger opportunity. And I think as sort of people's Bitcoins appreciate, there comes a point where they start to want to presumably use them. And we've seen over the last year, I think, pretty decent merchant adoption. And I think there's no good reason why pretty much every online retailer over the next 24 months wouldn't add some sort of Bitcoin capability in, because it should be really as simple as putting in a PayPal button. It's just another means of payment. So I think in terms of merchant adoption, it will come fairly quickly. The question is, when are people going to actually start spending and using their Bitcoins? And are they going to be using it for transactions on overstock.com, or is it going to start underpinning all these other applications? And it's probably going to be a combination of both, but I don't think we're quite at that tipping point where people are using their Bitcoins to buy a lot of things. But I think merchants are starting to understand that there's tremendous benefits in terms of reduced costs, reduced chargebacks, pretty much instantaneous settlement. And consumers are also seeing the benefits as when those savings are passed on to them, as well as things like identity theft. So I think it's coming, but I think Bitcoin needs, the infrastructure needs to greatly improve, and I think that we have not reached escape velocity yet.
Yeah, I would say, in fact, it's worse than that. I think I agree directionally. I think Bitcoin right now is priced for failure, in the sense that the total value of all the gold in the world today is about $10 trillion. Total value of all the Bitcoin is around $5 or $6 billion. So that means the market is assuming that there's a 1 in 2,000 chance, roughly, that Bitcoin becomes the next gold, or like electronic gold. If you think the chance is greater than that, you should buy some Bitcoin. So the market is pricing it right now for failure. But the underlying blockchain technologies are quite fundamental. And I think what we're going to see is Bitcoin eventually getting adopted, or Bitcoin-like technologies will get adopted in places where cash and credit cards just won't do. So trying to displace cash and credit cards is difficult. They already work pretty well, so maybe you can make it a little cheaper, more efficient, more international, whatever. But we have to find use cases where only Bitcoin will do. And I think, personally, that it's more likely to happen in machine-to-machine transactions, code talking to code, computers talking to computers, routers talking to routers, cars talking to traffic lights. Those kinds of protocol-type interactions are where you can't use credit cards, you can't use cash, and Bitcoin will be the native, or something like Bitcoin will be the native currency for computers, code, and intelligent machines.
And just to add to that, I completely agree. I think a use case such as microtransactions, we really don't know the size of that market, because right now with credit cards and existing payment systems, it's simply not feasible. So it's unclear how big that market is. And I think some situations where literally it's not so much replacing credit cards and cash as sort of allowing markets that literally don't exist to start occurring. So and just to put it in context, I think Coinbase and blockchain are probably two of the largest wallet providers. I think between the two of them, they collectively have like 2.5 million wallets. That number probably needs to be in the 50, 60, $100 million, excuse me, 100 million used wallets to really start getting to the point where it gets interesting.
I wanted to touch briefly upon the Korean market. We are also investors in Corbit, the first Bitcoin exchange in Korea. And one of the reasons why we made the investment is that we've seen the trend in Korea. Korea has been an innovator in terms of virtual currencies and embracing them and then massively adopting them with all its online games and the Cyworld, which was the first social network in Korea. And our theory was that Bitcoin could be the next cyber currency to be massively adopted in Korea, and believe that therefore Korea could be one of the early massive adopters. First for Naval, was that a similar reasoning for you to get involved in Corbit and Bitcoin in Korea?
Right.
Can you add some thoughts or
I would say
negate some of those thoughts?
Korea already has the most advanced payments market in the world. This is the only place I've ever traveled to where NFC seems common, where you can tap a card. This is the only place in the world that I've been to where you swipe a credit card and it clears instantly. There's no delay. And there's no signing ceremony that has to be done afterwards. You don't know how good you have it. The rest of the world, credit cards are a pain to use. I believe that Koreans have probably more credit cards per capita than anywhere else in the world. And Koreans are already used to paying for microtransactions. Not true micro, but semi-micro, where you pay $1 or $2 to watch a TV show online. So in many ways, this is the perfect early adopter market. But that said, this is also the market that least needs Bitcoin right now. If you're in Kenya and there is no functioning credit card infrastructure and M-Pesa charges you 30% on a transaction, then maybe there is a use case for Bitcoin. So again, with Korea, I think the Bitcoin use cases are going to be more underlying, more infrastructure. Corbit was interesting just because, actually I was connected through you, so I owe you a big thank you. Tony Liu is very, very smart, the founder, very compelling person. He understood where the market was headed. He had the leading exchange that he'd built with next to nothing. And one of the things that's odd about the Bitcoin space is most of the value in the space accrues into the Bitcoin itself. You can essentially buy an index fund into all the Bitcoin startups just by buying a Bitcoin. So in that sense, it makes it hard sometimes to say, well, why should I invest in a company? But exchanges are very interesting companies because they have network effects around them. They sort of have this marketplace effect, and usually they're a winner-take-all business. And the fact that he had built a leading exchange in Korea with so little capital was very, very compelling for me. So it's to date my only real investment that's been done in a Bitcoin operating company.
And we are proud of it being your first and only, so far, investment in a Bitcoin company.
And I would say I am involved in the Bitcoin space to learn. I'm actually not here to make money. I feel like there's a lot to be learned and there's to be a lot of evolution. And so being involved with the Korean Bitcoin exchange is very important because this is the early adopter market. You said Cyworld was one of the first social networks. As far as I know, it was the first social network in the world. And it was also the first one that had online microtransactions going and people buying things. And when you look at what Line and Naver and others have done here, Korea's always been on the leading edge. It's been different. The rest of the world copies Korea's, and it's not exact. It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And so whatever the Korean market figures out and how to use Bitcoin, I hope to learn that so it can be applied elsewhere in the world.
Wow. You know, those remarks about Korea, we thank you for seeing Korea that way, and you know, it makes us proud to be associated with you that way. To Tyler and Cameron, it's your first time in Korea, but you have heard about things happening in Korea. Wanted to ask you about your impressions before you came to Korea and now having walked the streets of Korea, visited some startups the last 2-3 days, and you know, can you give us some feedback about what you feel about the Korean market?
Sure. So I think, you know, being familiar with brands like Samsung and LG, living in the United States, it's very clear that Korea is very much a technology powerhouse, and I think you have a population that's technically savvy. There's strong smartphone adoption, tons of broadband, fast networks. So I think that the country is very ripe for something like Bitcoin, and there's strong precedent for digital currencies and things like Cyworld and massive multiplayer online gaming. So I think that this country could, very well be a great region for Bitcoin development. I think that regulation and sort of government blessing is going to be really important. But I think to Naval's point, the use cases of Bitcoin in Korea may not be marginally nearly as impactful as elsewhere in the world, and yet companies like Corbett that are building secure, reliable exchanges can be very valuable to the ecosystem at large. I think not only can it be a great company in Korea, but also sort of set the gold standard for other exchanges around the world. And I think the exchange business in Bitcoin will most certainly be regional or country-based because of the regulation differing from different areas. So I don't think there's going to be one sort of massive exchange in the world. I think that there will be a Korean exchange and a North American exchange. And so I think it's very important to foster those types of things and use the sort of technology that we develop in places like Korea and bring it to other places in the world.
Actually, the regulatory environment bit is very, very important. One way in which Korea can truly leapfrog the rest of the world in all the Bitcoin and related technologies is by the government having a very deregulated stance towards it. And I believe that's the case right now. But the US is no longer cutting edge when it comes to regulation. It's a large place. The regulatory bodies are very strong. We've seen what's been happening with the NSA over there. And in the US, the fear is all around terrorism and money laundering. And that fear, just to stop a few bad actors, could kill the entire Bitcoin ecosystem. I know a lot of the great Bitcoin entrepreneurs are looking to set up somewhere outside of the US for that reason. A lot of the original Bitcoin people have actually even left the US. So the innovation is actually happening truly globally. And Korea could be a great center because it has broadband penetration, because it has such fast mobile networks, because it has such an educated middle class and workforce, and because to date it has not had a heavy hand. I don't think China has a chance because China has capital controls. Capital controls and Bitcoin are incompatible. You can't have both. And China has censorship. You can't have censorship of speech in Bitcoin. The two are incompatible. So Korea is one of the very, very few places where Bitcoin can take off. And a lot of it comes down to the government having a light hand and the entrepreneurs here understanding the underlying technology and starting to experiment with it. This could end up being the hub. It's a real chance.
Yeah, I agree with that. We saw, we visited K-Valley yesterday, and it seems that, the government is really about innovation and technology. And my expectation was that this country would be on the cutting edge, and what I've seen, it is. And I think it could definitely be a global leader for Bitcoin, and that could be very exciting for the entire country.
You mentioned China right now, and that's a good segue. What do you think about what's happening there? There was a Bitcoin summit, I believe, last weekend. Government said, media, you can't cover it, and they're stopping the banks from exchanging into yuan. Do you think Bitcoin has a chance in China? I heard some pessimistic comments from you.
I think from a regulatory perspective, they're going to be very schizophrenic. They're going to try and say that China wants to be cool and cutting edge and wants to enter the modern world. So they're going to say, yes, we want Bitcoin, but China has capital controls and censorship. So they're going to say, no, we can't have Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is language, it is currency, it is a store of value, it is speech, it is all of those things. You can't separate the pieces. So because of that, I think China is going to be in a very difficult situation, and they're always going to have a love-hate relationship with Bitcoin. Right now, it's only a $5 billion market cap, so it's hard to move large assets through it, but if Bitcoin hits a $20 billion market cap or a $100 billion market cap, it could be really used for capital flight. So I think China's going to have a tough time with Bitcoin. I'm not looking to China to make Bitcoin valuable and successful. I think it is like the internet technologies in that some companies will embrace it, some companies will foster it, some countries will tolerate it, and some countries will only absorb it kicking and screaming when they have no other choice.
I think that we saw the impact of the Chinese demand in the fall when Bitcoin ran up, I think, close to $1,200 US a Bitcoin, and certainly that type of market participation is great, but I think that ultimately Bitcoin does not rise and fall on one country. So if China does re-enter the market at some later date, that would be great. But I think that there needs to be a lot more use cases in the developing world and other areas, and I just don't see Bitcoin rising and falling on one particular country.
We touched Korea, China, so briefly just Japan and Mt. Gox. Their efforts to keep it alive. Do you think it's worth keeping Mt. Gox alive? Mt. Gox being I guess, one of the first Bitcoin exchanges based in Tokyo. Your thoughts?
Mt. Gox used to be Magic the Gathering online exchange. It was never meant for Bitcoin. The fact that it made it this far is a miracle. It's a black mark on the community, and it kind of deserves to go away at this point.
I hope the creditors can get as much as they can out of it, but I agree that if Mt. Gox is brought back, it couldn't look anything like it was, and then it's just a name, and I think the name is really symbolic of the first wave of Bitcoin and the end of the beginning, and now we're in a new wave with better entrepreneurs. So I think that brand is tarnished, and I think that the market didn't really care that it left. The price was remarkably resilient. And I think Bitcoin's looking forward, and no one's really looking back. And it's not the only bad actor that was shaken out of the system. But I don't see any need to look backwards and try and revive it.
I think Mt. Gox is synonymous with Bitcoin 1.0, which was rife with lots of growing pains. And obviously, I'm very sympathetic to the individuals that lost money and or Bitcoins in that debacle. That being said, I think it's a perfect example of digital Darwinism. It's been sort of flushed out of the system, and I think Bitcoin 2.0 is here, and we're better off if Mt. Gox, I think, ultimately stays where it is.
The beauty of Bitcoin is you can store it online, you can store it offline, you can store it on a piece of paper, you can store it in your head, you can store it on your laptop. And it's basically like cash. So how much cash are you comfortable storing in an unregulated entity that in a different country that you don't know? I wouldn't be very comfortable storing any of it online or any substantial amount other than maybe a small amount. But the beauty of Bitcoin is the market can decide and you can choose how to store it. And the latest wallets for Bitcoin are very, very advanced. They use two-factor authentication. They use social authentication, where you need your family members to unlock it. They have memorable passphrases that you can just record in your head and walk around. So you don't need to trust third parties with your hard-earned money in the Bitcoin world. And I think Mt. Gox, unfortunately, is an abject lesson in that. And I do agree, I hope they recover as much as possible. But there won't be another Mt. Gox because people won't tolerate that kind of failure, and they won't put their money anymore with companies that don't have their act together.
We're sort of doing a geographical tour of Bitcoin around Asia, and now returning back to the US. It was recently announced or made public that you guys, the Winklevoss brothers, are planning a listing on NASDAQ of a Bitcoin ETF. Can you describe to us a little bit of what you guys are trying to do, and why is it so exciting?
Sure. So the biggest question we used to get, or we still get, is how do I buy Bitcoin? And the answer is not that simple. So we decided to figure out a way to make it simple. And so you get the exposure to Bitcoin, the asset, without actually having to go through the pain of buying Bitcoin or securely storing it. So the ETF we filed last July, and we've been going through a process with regulation, but we're very encouraged with the process, and we hope to list on NASDAQ soon. So it's basically a matter of making it more accessible and offloading the security burden onto us and bringing Bitcoin to a whole new investor class like mutual funds, pension funds, 401ks that actually can't hold gold bars, can't hold Bitcoin. And so we're bringing Bitcoin to Main Street. That's sort of a saying we have in America, from Wall Street to Main Street, which is the mainstream investor.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if the ETF comes to pass, that will single-handedly raise the price of Bitcoin, because it's still very hard to buy Bitcoin in quantity in the United States. Here it's easy. Corbett will have you in 3 minutes. They'll have Bitcoin in your hands. In the US, you go to Coinbase or somebody. They don't have the liquidity. They're not licensed in exchange. They can't hold your funds overnight. It takes 7 days to clear with all the regulations. ETFs are much easier for the average investor in the US. Here it's a different story. It's quite easy.
Yeah, and just so people understand how easy it is, it would be like buying a share in Apple on your E-Trade account or your Schwab account. So, and back to that process of buying Bitcoin in America, it's just the regulation's not clear. We don't have a North American Bitcoin exchange, even though Coinbase, you can buy Bitcoin on Coinbase. It's a wrapper for Bitstamp, which is a Slovenian company. So, so many things have to happen from a regulatory standpoint, infrastructure standpoint, in order for Bitcoin to get there. And I feel like we're maybe in the second inning. That's an American baseball term. There's 9 innings in an American baseball game, but it's very early. Just like people say, the internet in 1994, it took till late 90s, early 2000s, where people actually started doing commerce on the internet, and then a few years later, you can't live without it. So it's very early, but we're very excited for how this could go.
So I want to wrap up with one sort of question and then open it to the audience. But there is a community, official community, or is still there, but it's called the Bitcoin Foundation, of sort of the leading people in Bitcoin. And it's going through a lot of turmoil. A lot of people have left recently. And do you think, what do you think about Bitcoin Foundation? Is it time for a makeover, a time for another type of association to rise that will make it more pure and legitimate?
Honestly, I don't care about organizations or foundations. I think it's great that they have one. They should have 10. They should have 20. Bitcoin is completely decentralized. It doesn't need a head. It doesn't need a leader. It doesn't need an organization. It works on its own. It's pure technology. It's peer-to-peer. So I think the Bitcoin Foundation was the 1.0 foundation, just like Mt. Gox was the 1.0. And there might be a 2.0, and they'll revamp it, and they'll bring new people and new blood in. And it's a spokesperson for some parts of what's going on in Bitcoin, but Bitcoin doesn't need a spokesperson. It just works. It's like having a spokesperson for the internet. Do we need a spokesperson for the internet? I don't think so.
I mean, I don't think that Corbett's worried about the Bitcoin Foundation. We're not certainly worried about it when we deal with the RETF and the SEC, and when we look at companies. It's not even a consideration. If anything, it's a minor distraction, but I don't think Bitcoin rises and falls on it.
The best advocacy for Bitcoin is creating use cases that are changing lives, creating large value and impact, and companies that are going out and building amazing products. I think that speaks a lot more than individuals who are trying to sort of advocate on behalf of, as Naval pointed out, a decentralized, open source protocol and technology. So I don't really spend much time thinking about it. I think it's unfortunate that it's been a bit of a distraction or a sideshow at times, but I think that the A players in Bitcoin and the top technologists are not thinking about it. They're sort of keeping their heads down and building out, whether it's Corbett or some other company, to really bring Bitcoin into the next level.
Great. It sounds like there might be involvement of the Winklevoss brothers in the Korean Bitcoin space in the near future, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, we met the founder an hour ago. Seems like a very sharp individual, and of course, Naval being involved and you yourself being involved is always a good stamp of approval. So yeah, I mean, I think exchange businesses are very interesting and attractive, and as we mentioned earlier, I think Korea is definitely an interesting place for Bitcoin, and it very well may be our first Bitcoin Asian investment.
Thank you. I'll open it to the public. Can we get some mics, please?
Hi, this is Youngjun from Seoul, and nice to meet you, Winklevoss brothers. And
Can you speak louder a little?
Sure.
Louder?
I got a question to Winklevoss brothers, and thanks for explanation on Bitcoin. And as an investor, not as huge like you, just a small investor for Bitcoin, I got a question, 3 questions for you. As you have seen today, there's no zero Bitcoin related booth here for startup, and so in this very rare economic environment in Korea, what's your recommendation for we can start off for the Bitcoin by spending not huge money, but just around under $100,000. It's the first question I have for startup. And second question is that as investor, I just can't help but asking you this. Do you see any chance that
저기 첫 번째 질문을 한국말로 해주실래요? 이해가 안 됐어요.
예. 그래서 이제 스타트업을 저희 한국에서 하려면은
네.
약간 1억 원 정도 투자해서 했을 때 어떤 게 좋겠는지 이렇게 한국에서 잘 모르는 상황에서.
비트코인
예,
스타트업에.
비트코인 related startup. 예. Just first question.
예, 하나씩 할게요.
예.
So, you know, if I'm a startup and that I'm seeking investment for $100,000. Anyways, what kind of, if I'm trying to start a Bitcoin-related business, what type of business would you recommend?
It seems like the exchanges make money. We know that. We can see that. There's many examples. It seems like the Coinbases, the merchant processors of the world, are real businesses and they do well. So I might start there.
I think potentially like a wallet-based company focused on Africa, where we've seen a currency, a centralized currency, M-Pesa, which charges exorbitant fees, being used by over 35 million individuals in that content alone. Bitcoin beats M-Pesa across the board. So I think bringing wallets to those areas of the world, the unbanked individuals, people who literally cannot get banks or credit, I would focus on serving that market.
I see.
예, 한 질문만 더 해주세요. 다른 사람들도 있으니까.
Yeah. Then what do you forecast per Bitcoin dollar value by end of this year? Sorry for if I asked you a question you have answered millions of times.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, we've sort of played around with some ideas or hypothesis about sort of how the U.S. dollar is like a mature store of value, and how it's basically the lifespan of the U.S. dollar is about 8% of the lifespan of gold, and I think in about 5 to 7 years, Bitcoin, because of technology adoption curves, Bitcoin could very well be as mature a store of value over the next, let's say, half a decade to a decade. And I think at that case, in that sense, it gets pretty interesting. But without speculating on the price, I think that Bitcoin needs a lot more infrastructure and a lot more use cases. It's really, I think trying to guess the price out 12 months from now is kind of a loser's game. Personally, I'm looking at a 10-year horizon, and I'm not looking to play by the year or by the month or by every 2 years. I think it's really, we're looking at a 10-year play. If you think you're in 1994 of the internet, you're looking at 10 to 15 years. And I think, so it's unclear. I think things are happening probably slower than everybody would expect. At the same time, if it does happen, it's always going to probably be faster than we think. So,
I think for Bitcoin to really work, whether it's at the commerce level or machine-to-machine level, I think that the market cap needs to be orders of magnitude larger. When that happens, I don't know exactly, but it needs to happen.
Next, I think we might be able to do two more questions. Yes, one. The gentleman over there. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Arnar from Iceland. What about the other forks that are out there? Like recently there was an Aurora coin released in Iceland, and it's because of the currency regulations over there, or Litecoin. Any thoughts about that? Any things that you're betting on?
Yeah. So the question is about different kinds of coins based on similar technologies, and I think you have to very carefully break them into different groups. So there's a set of coins that do basically the same thing as Bitcoin and are trying to be a currency, and they have some slight differences, but they're basically the same. I don't think much of those coins. I don't think money is a network effect. Everybody wants to use the same money, like everybody wants to speak the same language, like everybody wants to use the same, use the same social network. So barring cultural and regulatory barriers, we're going to converge in one electronic currency, and that's probably Bitcoin. It's the largest network, it's the most secure, it has the most APIs, most accepted. I think there are other coins that can be developed that will do things that Bitcoin cannot. So for example, Ethereum and Counterparty and Mastercoin, there are a bunch of others, are used to build smart contracts. And to be good for smart contracts, the coin has to be very flexible, but that makes it not secure. So you don't want to use that same coin for money. So they're doing things that Bitcoin cannot do. And then finally, there's a set of coins like Zero Coin and Zero Cash, which are anonymous. And they're doing things that Bitcoin does not want to do. Bitcoin doesn't want to be banned by regulators and used in black markets. So the Bitcoin core developers are never going to approve those kinds of use cases. So I think look at the coins that are doing things that Bitcoin cannot do or will not do. And those are interesting. But the ones that are just Bitcoin all over again, I don't think they're that interesting.
And last question. Okay, the gentleman over there with.
한국말로 할게요.
Yes.
비트코인 관련 스타트업을 준비하는 학생인데요. 마운트곡스 사태에서 볼 수 있듯이 비트코인 관련 사업을 하는 사람에게 그런 사업가에게 윤리적인 문제도 굉장히 중요하다고 생각합니다. 그래서 비트코인 관련 사업을 준비하는 그런 예비 창업자에게 해주실 조언을 새 연사들에게 듣고 싶습니다.
So this guy is a student entrepreneur who wants to soon start a Bitcoin-related business. And as we've seen from the story of Mt. Gox, ethics are very important in business, and especially in Bitcoin. Any advice you could give related to ethics and in this Bitcoin space?
I mean, the only thing I would say is that Bitcoin, if you're building a Bitcoin startup, you're most likely dealing with money, and there's sort of a fiduciary responsibility. It's not like other typical startups where the goal is to grab a lot of users right away and then build a business model. You have to really have your act together. You have to have your security because you're dealing with other people's money. The stakes are much higher. The consequences are real. So do not get involved unless you're completely confident that that you're willing to basically play by those rules. Because with Mt. Gox, I mean, we've saw, I think, basically close to $500 million basically sent off to Bitcoin heaven, and it may or may not be recovered. It's unclear, and people lost. It's very painful, and that company will probably be in lawsuits and bankruptcy for a long, long time, and it gets very messy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, ethics is what you do despite the money. Being ethical is not profitable, but it's part of the moral imperative that you take on by operating in this space. You are dealing with money, you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with their savings, and Bitcoin has had enough bad actors now that I think you're going to see people being very careful about who they do business with in the Bitcoin space. You're going to have to, as you are hypothesizing, you can build a brand around trust. There's a reason why banks always have these large fancy buildings, right? They have lots of steel, lots of glass, big pillars, Roman columns, lots of guards, lots of people standing around in nice suits, bankers wear ties, because you're trusting them with money. It's about trust. They're trying to convey to you, you can trust me. I make a good salary. I drive a Mercedes or a high-end car. I'm not going to run off with your money. So banks build trust, and they use that trust to then handle your money. Same way, if you're going to play in Bitcoin, you have to build trust. I'm not saying do it with fancy cars or fancy suits, but you have to do it by being auditable, by being transparent, by being ethical.
Well, thank you. We started this panel in your introductions. You all mentioned you were students in Bitcoin, but I think through this conversation and through your involvement in the business and through everything that you're doing in the Bitcoin ecosystem, you've proved that you're true gurus in Bitcoin. So we thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. Let's give a hand to our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.